Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the September meeting of the New York City Transit Authority and its subsidiaries, Manhattan and Bronx Surface Transportation Operating Authority and the Staten Island Rapid Transit, MTA Transit for short. Do we have any public speakers?
Yes, we now have 3 public speakers.
Oh, okay.
The first public speaker is Murray Bowden.
Good morning. Most of what I need to say shouldn't be said here. It should be possible for me to meet with somebody from this committee, this agency, or any other agency, and have those discussions somewhere else. Port Authority assigned someone to me, and the chairman always says at the beginning of the meeting, if you need to discuss something, ask. I ask, and I have a meeting. Here, the system is such that nobody can meet with anybody of significance and discuss any serious issue. So there's a structural problem here. I had a problem with the New Jersey Turnpike. They took me to court and got a restraining order on me, so I should not go and correct items that they refused to correct. And so in front of the judge, it was like presenting a doctoral thesis. I had to defend my proposition, and I defended it correctly, and he said, you know, you're right. So I've moved from the technical to the psychological. What's going on and why things aren't corrected is not because of the issues, but because our culture prevents discussion. I've moved from an iPad to a smartphone. The MTA has their homepage in a form that works on this. I cannot get this either on an iPad or on a phone. The Dutch legislature has given up all paper, and every member of the Dutch legislature has an iPad, and all of the papers come in on electronically. How much paper is wasted with this? I said that I was going to discuss this today. At the end of the 2 minutes that I might not finish and I'd have to speak over. And I was told that the police department would take care of me if I went over. Well, maybe I'll just go over and see whether or not you're willing to arrest me here. Because the issue is whether or not we can communicate with you. Preferably not here. Preferably in the discussion with the people involved and go further. I'm working on the design of rail cars. I'm working with 3 institutions, a university in Amherst, somebody in Long Island City, and Baruch College.
Mr. Bowden, can you summarize your remarks, please?
So here we are. I cannot complete my discussion, which didn't belong here in the first place, or I risk getting arrested again.
Thank you. The next speaker is William Henderson.
You won't have to arrest me, I promise. First, I want to take an opportunity to thank New York City Transit and all their people for extraordinary efforts in preparing for Hurricane Irene and bringing the system back into service after the storm had passed. While it wasn't as severe as it could have been, professionalism of the people of transit inspires confidence that subway and bus systems are up to whatever challenge they may face. It's truly a job well done. At this meeting, you're presenting as an information item a plan to reduce the A-Division subway service on minor holidays and less traveled days near major holidays. This follows on the implementation of a pilot program for light riding schedules on the 1 and 6 lines this summer. We don't suggest that New York City Transit should run more service than is needed to reasonably accommodate passenger demand, but we would like to see similar emphasis on restoring service where it's appropriate. There's still a number of riders who were severely inconvenienced by last year's service cuts and continue to have difficulties traveling by transit as a result. We can only hope that the same level of effort has gone into finding and and identifying opportunities to replace service where it's appropriate, and as there has been put into finding ways to cut service during light riding periods. Thank you.
Thank you. The last speaker is Alex Jakobson.
Yes, hi, good morning. My name is Alex Jakobson. I'm a resident of Staten Island. Some might remember I was here back in July. Admittedly, I had gotten in touch over email with somebody. I think it was even a couple workers. But then our communication kind of ceased, so I found it, I deemed it appropriate to appear here again. I have a few questions concerning basically all three services. First off, concerning all of them, the ads say that MTA can be communicated with on social networks such as Facebook. I was not able to find an MTA page or group on Facebook. I was able to find sort of anti-MTA page, which I didn't feel like joining at this point. So I would like to, if anybody could give me any direction where exactly I can, address my concerns on Facebook or YouTube or anywhere, so I don't have to show up here, make speeches. Now, on to particular things. First off, I have a couple of questions about ferry service. First off, why is it that during late night time, usually older, smaller boat is used? It causes people to kind of jam up on that boat. I would like to know that, and I would like to know why on weekend evenings, starting like 10 or 11 p.m., ferries only run once an hour. It seems to me that passenger volume during that time at least no smaller than during regular time. A lot of people are coming back from, spending...
Mr. Jakobson, we're not responsible for ferry service.
All right. Are you responsible for subway? Can you please? Okay, all right, sorry. As far as subway, 3 weeks ago, I had a very unpleasant experience of getting stuck for about 10 minutes without noticing what's going on, without the ability to communicate with the driver or any authority because I couldn't find, how you communicate, and without even able to move onto a different car because car doors are locked these days. I understand it's probably for passenger safety, but in a situation like this, you kind of one might want to move up to another car to find an attendant, ask what's going on. It was 3 weeks ago exactly on a Monday during 10 a.m., at about 10 a.m. on our train. I think trains should not be leaving, if there is an information that there is like a train jam ahead, trains should not be leaving station before the jam is cleared. To avoid situations like that. Another situation with subways, I think, there's a lot of panhandling right now. A lot of these musicians also breaking in. And personally, I do not appreciate that because I find that annoying. I know you cannot put a cop into every subway car, but maybe something can be done about that.
Can you sum up your remarks?
Well, I had a few questions about bus service. I would appreciate if somebody, just like last time, somebody maybe approached me.
I spoke to you last time. I'd be happy to.
Could we? Yeah, I would greatly appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. That's the final speaker.
We thank our public speakers, and we thank their keeper very much. The minutes from our last meeting in July are under Section 1 in the book. Are there any additions or corrections? Is there a motion to approve the minutes? All in favor? Is there any changes to the work plan?
No, Mr. Chairman.
All right. It's my pleasure to introduce our dynamic agency head, Thomas R. Prendergast. Tom, since our last meeting, did anything on... Huh? Thomas F. Oh, did I get you? Oh, sorry. Since our last meeting, did anything exciting happen, like a hurricane, a earthquake, a flood,
Carmen will go through the
shutdown of the entire system? Anything all happen?
Carmen will go through the operations report, but I have made a comment to a number of board members prior to the meeting. In my 35 years, I've experienced a lot, certainly snowstorms, certainly hurricanes here, water main breaks, things like that, but never the number that we have in the past year. It's kind of a unique year from that standpoint. Carmen's going to give a report on the subway side, and I'll add some comments on the bus side with respect to the hurricane. Carmen?
Good morning, everyone. To answer your question, I'm only 34 years old, so all of this is a result of the recent events. Just like to start by addressing the hurricane and what that meant to the Department of Subways, because it really was challenging. And if you recall, we had just come through earlier in the month of August a number of summer storms that put a lot of water into our system. So it was a constant battle of maintaining the low-lying areas. But then earlier that week, just before the hurricane, we had the earthquake, if you recall. And that occurred on a Monday. And actually, as a result of that, to ensure that the system was safe and reliable, we walked every single inch of our railroad. And we had our engineering staff actually look at all of our outside structures just to be sure and give us 100% confidence. We thought we were, but just to give us the confidence that we were 100% safe. That led right into the final planning for the hurricane. As you recall, we were looking for a strong Category 1 storm or a weak Category 2 storm, which meant we would follow the hurricane plan that is published for the city. We would also be involved in the evacuation of folks from the Zone A areas, the low-lying areas that were expected to be flooding. We immediately went into the plan and not only fulfilled our obligations in that regard, working very close with our colleagues from buses, but we also, 6 hours before the brunt of the storm started to hit us, we had our entire fleet laid up so that we had no equipment actually left in low-lying areas. That was approximately 1,000 cars that we had to move to higher ground. We then went through a system of shutting down power and again all those low-lying areas, because we fully expected in a Cat 1 that we would see a number of our under-river tubes actually full with seawater. So we went through a procedure to actually power down and remove communications from those areas, which we did. As the storm passed, obviously we didn't get the brunt of it as we fully expected, but we did go through a period of fully making an assessment of the entire system. And then we had to bring the entire system back up, and that was an extraordinary initiative by the Department of Subways and all the groups that support subways, and we were able to have the system back up and fully operating Monday morning at 6 a.m. for full service. There were two areas in particular where we had the problem of dealing with a huge amount of water. One was out 145th Street near Lenox through the yard floods there, and we had one of the tubes, the Harlem River tube, filled up with water. And also down at 86th Street in Brooklyn, we had water there from a creek that overran its banks, and the water was so high we were pumping water and pumping it right back into our system. So two difficult areas, but we were able to overcome both. Earlier, or last week, I should say, September 19th, we had another event which again presented a challenge. That was the water main break at 106th Street in Grand Central or Central Park West, causing an interruption in service on the A, B, C, and D lines. That immediately put us into a mode where we had over 200 Subways employees out at the site. We had to remove approximately 4.2 million gallons of water from the system as a result of that water main break. Our folks worked through the night, removing, not only taking the water out, but as you can imagine, a lot of debris comes into the system as a result. All of that debris had to be removed for service in the morning. So we were bagging lots of sand and dirt and debris. We had to remove signals and signal devices. It was a very challenging evening for Subways, for New York City Transit. But again, in the morning we had service restored.
Can I ask you something about that incident, Carmen? I was waiting at 86th Street, I guess, shortly after that water main started, and lots of people. There was no service, no trains were coming. There were no announcements. Lots of people were assembling on the platform. Finally, after waiting 20 minutes and having a choice of a B or a C and neither one coming and hearing no trains in either direction, I went up to the booth agent and I said, "Is there a problem?" And she said, "Why do you ask that?" I said, "Well, there hasn't been a train in 20 minutes and maybe you should call somebody. And she said, I haven't heard about any problems, but I'll make a call for you. And she called, and then she found out there was a water main break. So she made an announcement on both platforms, and everybody went streaming out of the station. How long should it have taken for the booth agents along the line or somebody to make the announcement that there was a problem, there would be no service?
Usually once we're notified of the problem, that all comes through the rail control center, so those interactions between departments are put out over the 6-wire. It's usually immediate once we have the first notification.
But I've got to add, in those minutes after a water main break, it's not clear as to what the size of the water main break and how much water we're going to take on is the sum. And once that is assessed, and once we know we're going to be out of service for a while, that's when that. So if in the first 15 to 20 minutes we're still in the process of ascertaining how big the water main break is going to be, obviously we're trying to retain service. But at that point, that's probably the break point at which we should be knowing things, no pun intended, and getting word out.
Basically no rule, it's just played by ear, so you ascertain how big the break is.
Yes, and then DEP's first plan of attack is to basically shut down the water main so that they can stop the flooding from occurring, and then we start our service restoration efforts as well as cleanup efforts.
Okay. Going back to the hurricane for a moment, I just want to thank my colleagues sitting here to my left, NYPD. They did an extraordinary job working with us to ensure the system was protected during the entire 36 hours that we were down. So thank you to the Transit Bureau. Moving on to subway performance indicators, weight assessment for the month of July decreased by 0.4%. It was essentially flat from what we reported last time. On-time performance, if you recall, we were having significant issues with the IRT the last time we met. Things have begun to improve significantly. As a matter of fact, IRT performance for July was up 0.5%, essentially driven by the 3 and 6 lines, which were up 6.8 and 6.1% respectively. We still saw a decrease on the 2 and the 5 lines of 4% and 7.8%. Again, result of the work that's going on up at the interlocking at 180th Street. We were able, though, to maintain weight assessment through that area, which is the more important figure rather than the on-time performance. We're really trying to make sure that evenness and loading is what we're addressing, and forego a little bit of the on-time performance if necessary. So since May, both the 2 and the 5 lines, the improvement has been 13% and 18% across both of those lines. Moving on to key performance indicators, service KPI was down 0.3%. And the system passenger environmental survey was down 0.4% through the month of July. The area of the PES environment survey, one of the areas that I have my staff looking at is on the station side. I'm not clear why we see some differences between boroughs, but that's one of the things we're looking at. And as soon as I get some answers, which hopefully won't take too long, I will share that information with you. Mean distance between failures decreased slightly in the month of July at 123,972 miles. It was down 1.9% from July of last year. The 12-month average is 174,113 miles, which is actually a 5.3% improvement from the preceding 12 months. That concludes my report.
Mr. President, following the restoration of service after the end of the hurricane, I sent a message on behalf of the entire committee to the staff saying that they did an unbelievable job in shutting down service and restoring it so quickly. You guys absolutely knocked yourself out and did a fabulous job. And after the water main break at 106th Street, to have service back the next day at 8 a.m. was an even, almost as good an accomplishment. So you guys really rang the bell since our last meeting, and congratulations to you.
Thank you.
Could I just add one thing to that, which people don't realize is that, I guess, several years ago, people had spent an enormous amount of time trying to prepare that hurricane report, probably with the thought in their head that this is never going to happen. And from what I heard, everyone focused on implementation of that plan rather than trying to recreate the wheel. So those people that worked on it several years
Yes,
ago.
that was the
really
Bible that was followed almost without deviation, so you should feel perfectly justified in the effort that you put in there.
Jeff, as a matter of fact, as a result of actually having the experience now, we're going to revise that document one more time. There's a lot of lessons learned.
There's a couple of points we need to add, and I'd like to make them. At this committee, we focus on subways, but as you know, New York City Transit all has a bus piece and it has a paratransit piece. And we'd be remiss if we didn't acknowledge the fact that the New York City Transit bus piece was instrumental, as was paratransit, in the evacuation of Zone A in both Queens and in Brooklyn. There are a lot of people that had to avail themselves of that service to get them to a shelter, and the people in Darrell Eric's organization and Tom Charles' organization did an outstanding job, as the people did in subways. I think the point Jeff makes is a very important one. To execute a plan in and of itself is difficult, but to have a plan that's well laid out that you don't deviate from, and on those issues that we thought very, very carefully about, and the we is collectively identified as Office of Emergency Management, the other city agencies, as well as MTA agencies, were the same areas when the plan was developed we knew there were going to be issues. But the overwhelming majority of the decisions just followed the implementation of the plan as laid out. And one of the things that I know people look at, and they always will, is the decision to shut down service to protect equipment so you can restore. And one of the underlying principles, I was not here, other people were here for the formulation of that plan after Katrina in 2007, was the focus on trying to make sure once the storm is over, getting the city up and running as close to as normal as possible with the transportation network in place. And we were able to demonstrate that, and I take my hats off to the employees for that.
I just want to add that for the Port Jervis line, the hurricane isn't over yet, and we appreciate the fact that MTA Bus continues to provide alternate service for us up there. We've got 2 miles of track out. Thank heavens there were no trains on those tracks when those tracks went, because they seem to have gone in a rather explosive fashion. And our continued thanks for providing bus service beginning 2 days after the hurricane, when all of the buses had been deployed during the hurricane. It was a yeoman's job, and we appreciate it.
Thank you.
While we're in the process of handing out plaudits, I'd like, on behalf of the Bronx Borough President, and I know Commissioner Ferrer joins me in thanking Tom Prendergast for being able to focus on the Bronx subway stations, particularly 149 and 138. Well done. Thank you very much. We appreciate it in the Bronx.
Thank you. Somebody has this on tape? Jim?
Just so you people know that your services don't go unnoticed, I received a few phone calls and people said, "What are MTA buses doing in Beacon?" So they were noticeable. People saw them, and we explained to them, and we're appreciative. Thank you.
Make sure I pass that on to Daryl. Part of the presentation, Cheryl Kennedy.
With respect to safety, results were mixed. The subway customer accident rate decreased slightly by 3.3% compared to the previous 12-month period. In the month of June, the accident rate also decreased 19%. The employee lost time accident rate decreased 9.1% for the month of July 2011 versus July 2010. However, the rolling 12-month rate increased by 12.5% over the previous 12-month period. There were 92 confirmed fires for the month of July, down 7.1% from the previous year. Fires decreased over the last 12 months by 4.3%. 100% of all fires were categorized as being low or average in severity.
Could somebody tell me what happened with this derailment in August?
I can if you want.
Okay, good.
Okay. The derailment occurred on August 3rd, and they were performing track maintenance on the Lex line north of 116th Street, and the supervisor flagged the train through the area at a slow speed, but they hadn't had all of the tracks shored up, so that's why they had the derailment. It was in a work area. If you want to add anything.
No, it was truly an event that we train our supervisors not to. The train shouldn't have been moving over that area, even though it was moving at a very, very restricted speed. We should have had more safety built into the tracks before we moved the train. So why the supervisor, it was supervisory in nature.
When you do track reconstruction and as you're trying to keep service moving, you don't have all the fasteners in place, and there's a level past which you don't let trains move on the track. Otherwise, the gauge will spread or the rail will turn, and that's literally what happened in this point. It was a human failure on the part of the supervisor, relatively young, needs to be retrained, but in actual effect, he should not have waved the train through the area until he had more securements in place.
Do we have any crimes?
Good morning. Assistant Chief Owen Monahan, representing Chief Joseph Fox, newly assigned as the Chief of the Transit Bureau. He would have been here today if it wasn't for pressing business with the Police Commissioner that he has at this time. Well, as was mentioned before...
We aren't acquiring anti-aircraft at the MTA, are we?
I cannot comment on that.
Okay.
As was mentioned, the Transit Bureau did indeed have a very interesting couple of weeks. We did deal with the hurricane and the earthquake, but in addition to that, we had a credible threat against the city, which required several days of ramping up deployments, culminating in probably the most significant event occurring on that day in the entire country, the 9/11 commemoration ceremony. So the men and women of the Transit Bureau did indeed work long, hard hours, many of them giving up days off to prepare, and I think they acted admirably responding. Now, for the year to date, we are experiencing a spike in crime. We're experiencing a 17% increase in total major felonies. And we've spoken about the reason before, and I have to reiterate that reason right now. It's electronic devices. We've heard this before, but let me emphasize. The iPhone 4, launched in June of last year, gained steady popularity amongst our passengers, and at the same time, it gained steady popularity amongst our thieves as a easy mark to sell in secondary markets. We also experienced an increase in thefts of reading devices such as the iPad 2 or the Kindle. Now, in August, 62% of all of our crime occurred on the train, and another 17% occurred on the platform. So 78% of all of the crime occurring in the Transit Bureau occurred on the train or very close to the train doors. So what have we done to respond to that and deploy? Well, we have not given up the stop them at the gate concept as far as fare evasion. Our fare evasion arrests are up. But along with that, we've implemented several initiatives to focus and deploy our police officers on the trains and platforms. One is happening in Brooklyn called the Force Field Operation, where we're deploying police officers to specific train runs and fixed on platforms. Our unsafe riding initiative, which began 2 years ago, is also a method to respond to the crime on train. We've got 13,000 enforcement contacts focusing on the riding in between the train car, which, as we've stated prior times, it's a method for the bad guys to find our victims. It's also a very important safety enforcement tool that we have to prevent people from falling between the cars. We've also implemented a decoy unit. This decoy unit is out on the trains and platforms in targeted areas looking for bad guys that are reaching into bags. We've expanded that to include the snatch technique that our perps are utilizing, grabbing these devices. Now, much of the crime is happening on a weekend. Weekend crime, 46% of all of our crime occurred either on a Friday, Saturday, or Sunday. Now, to respond to that, we are participating in what we call Total Impact with our fellow officers from the Housing Bureau and Patrol Services Bureau. The Transit Bureau is receiving help or officers that are deployed to train stations on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays, working with transit officers as part of this Total Impact program. So with those initiatives, they're very important, but I can't overstate the importance of crime prevention, passenger awareness. What we've done is we've created an initiative with the Community Affairs Office that we're teaming up at minimum 25 officers 3 times a week that are giving out passenger awareness, crime information handouts. Any one of these operations, we can hand out at minimum 15,000 flyers to passengers just to get the word out and to create this awareness of the snatch and grab phenomenon that's happening. So this spike concerns us, but we do have to put it in perspective. We are averaging less than 7 crimes per day year to date. And if you look at that compared to 1990, the average was 50 crimes, nearly 50 crimes per day on the Transit Bureau. So that's, it concerns us, but that's a perspective to take.
Andrew?
I agree with you that it has to be put into perspective, and most of the crimes that are making the spike are crimes against property, but there has been, and it's been well publicized, obviously, the number 4 train slasher in the area of 170th Street and Mount Eden Avenue. And I assume we have undercover folks working the entire area, because those kinds of crimes really frighten passengers. It's one thing to be robbed, it's another to be defaced, obviously.
Absolutely, and it is a very serious violent crime. We've had 2 instances where slashings have occurred on the train, and we have responded in earnest with a host of different tactics that I don't want to get into here, but that's up in the Bronx on the number 4.
The chief mentioned 9/11. Near the entrance, the Manhattan entrance to the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel is the MTA parking garage. The Port Authority was given permission to store the lamps that form the twin towers of light, and they are set up on the roof of the MTA garage. And the manager of the garage actually invited me down there to see the lights being turned on after the 9/11 ceremony this year. And as a matter of fact, he and I laid down on our backs in the middle of the circle of lights, which is sort of like World War II technology, because it's these big spotlights that go up into the sky, and the 2 circles form these 2 beams. And it was really quite an exciting experience, and you should know that the MTA had a part in it by providing that facility, and it was really quite exciting. I'm sorry, Tom.
Finance. Preliminary July 2011 fare box revenue was $302.7 million, $2 million or 0.9% below forecast. Year-to-date fare box revenue was a little over $2 billion, $6 million below forecast. Average non-student fare in July 2011 was $1.64. In 1996, constant 1996 dollars, the average fare fell from $1.38 in 1996 to $1.10 in 2011. Preliminary July 2011 operating expenses before depreciation and other than personal expenses and benefits were below forecast by $18 million, just under 2%, due mostly to the favorable timing of fringe benefits and several non-labor expenses. Year-to-date operating expenses were $31 million below forecast, due primarily to the favorable timing of several non-labor expenses, lower paratransit completed trips, and favorable accrual billing adjustments. Ridership in July 2009 totaled 184.9 million, 0.9% below forecast, and year-to-date ridership was 1.34 billion, 0.4% below forecast. In July 2011, the average weekday subway ridership was 5.1 million, an increase of 1.8% over the prior month, over the same month in the prior year. July 2011 average weekday local bus ridership was 2 million, a decrease of 4.3% from July 2010, and express bus ridership was 39,000, a decrease of 2.1% from July 2010. In July 2011, average weekday paratransit ridership was 29,000, a decrease of 1.1% from July 2010. An early look at the preliminary August 2011 financial results show that total farebox revenue was $16.9 million, or 5.4% below forecast, with $14.5 million of the underrun attributed to the effects of Hurricane Irene. Preliminary August 2011 operating expenses before depreciation and OPEB were below forecast by $2.2 million.
The figure that always excites me in there is, and I've said this before, that in 1996 dollars, the average person who rides the subway is paying about 30% less than he did then. So inflation is a lot, but we are not raising our prices, at least in the last 15 years, more than the rate of inflation. And as a matter of fact, it's almost 30% less for the average rider. Chuck?
I have three quick questions. First, as I understand it, subway passes, bus passes are processed, free subway passes for students, are processed through the New York City Department of Education. And my question, and you may not have the answer at the moment, but I would like to get it, is do those passes also go to parochial school students? There is no religious or secular barrier when you walk through the toll booth or the fare booth. And my question is, are they also receiving
Mr. Florenz has the answer to that.
Commissioner, the Department of Education determines which school actually gets them, but there is no distinction between parochial, private, or public. I can speak as a parent of former high school students who went to parochial schools. They had their MetroCard pass.
Good. Two, if you look at page 4.13, it appears that most of the overtime is in maintenance and coverage. Has thought been given to the possibility of bringing back some of the employees in that area so as to replace the overtime component for maintenance? Because maintenance is, of course, critical to wait time.
The driver isn't necessarily a lower amount of headcount. The driver is access to track and the ability to be able to do the work in hours when we're not running a lot of train service. So in the future, we'll probably come to the board with some ideas as to ways we can do that. Unfortunately, they will impact service, and we're going to try to see what's the best way to get the balance between having those inspection and maintenance activities done, having them done timely, having them done as much as possible on straight time, although some will have to be overtime, and also do it with minimum impact to the customers.
Would you take a look at the possibility of perhaps having that kind of work done at night with, if necessary, partial shutdowns to affect that result?
We're looking at that. As a matter of fact, we were thinking of bringing an item for discussion to the board this month, but there's just too much on the agenda. That and also refuse removal, which is a topic that the board is extremely interested in. We expect to bring to this committee, next month.
The last question I have is this. Have collective bargaining negotiations commenced with TWU Local 100, whose contract expires January 15th, as I understand?
They haven't commenced yet, but we're on the offing of having them commence. But I don't really want to go too far on labor discussions in this meeting.
I'm not pressing you on that. I am, however, suggesting the time is of the essence in terms of getting things going. And I
Understood.
know you are very conscious of it.
Understood, yes.
We're going to probably need your help there anyway, Chuck. You know that.
Good morning. Looking at the capital program results, contract commitments during the months of June and July totaled $477 million. The lion's share of that was in 3 bus purchases for 328 articulated buses, 171 natural CNG buses, and 90 diesel buses. Other projects included one that Carmen referred to where we had flooding at the 145th Street station on the Lenox Avenue line. We awarded a mitigation contract to address that because that NORAD has been vulnerable to previous nor'easter storms as well. We also awarded a contract in Staten Island to rehabilitate 8 bridges. These are 8 railroad bridges for Staten Island Rapid Transit. And also a stormwater sewer project for the Arthur Kill Road and Allentown Lane in Staten Island. That's directly in front of our Charleston bus annex. Completions for the same period totaled $142 million. A number of projects, including a signal project to replace stop cables at 326 locations system-wide. An ADA accessibility improvement project in coordination with the 45th Road Courthouse Square Station on the Flushing 7 line and Court Square Station on the Crosstown G. Painting project in Manhattan, our elevated structure on the Broadway line between LaSalle and 133rd, that's the arch over 125th Street, was completed. And some work on substation enclosures at 3 locations throughout the city. We also did work on the platform gap fillers at 14th Street. That's on the number 6 local track. That work was completed. And finally, part of our stations component program, we completed 18 stairs along the Liberty A line in Queens. That completes my report, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions for our chief capitalist, Professor Fred Smith? Chuck?
I have a question. This may not be the exact point of the escalator and the elevators over at Pelham Bay Park Station, according to your own statistics, are just awful. I mean, those statistics show that they're barely functional. Is there anything we can do to get that fixed pretty soon?
We're going to have a presentation on elevators and escalators, and Tony Suarez, who heads up that group, so he'll have some time to prepare for that answer, but we expect to give that presentation in the next few minutes.
Oh, good.
Capital construction. Are you, Michael?
Present. Okay, I'm going to try to be brief. I'm going to actually start in a little different way because I have some clips, and I would rather start with number 7, where I have actually no pictures. Just wanted to update you that in August we awarded a $514 million contract for all the systems work, and that actually will allow us to move forward and get trains running December 2013. At a point of interest, the running tunnel, that this is our biggest contract, $1.2 billion, is going to be completed 5 months ahead of schedule. Substantial completion is going to be in April 2012 rather than in September 2012.
This could ruin your reputation.
Absolutely. Well, don't worry about that one. We are able to get the contractor out at one site, in fact, 11 months ahead of schedule, so we can start the systems work this October. So by the end of October, they will be out at Site P, so we can get the systems work to start actually 6 months ahead of schedule. I would like actually to update you on the number on the Fulton Transit Center. Since last meeting, we have opened, in fact, 2 stations. This is the William Street station that was open. And you can see that there are some historical murals as well, and a gate that was fixed. This is actually the R going southbound, and the underpass was also, this is part of the Day Street underpass again. We have rebuilt the murals that existed there and brought them back into actually it's a very pretty station. Invite you to go and see it.
Why are there no people in these pictures?
Because we took them just before we opened it. Next. Well, this is the one, 2nd Avenue. 2nd Avenue, actually, we had some of you potentially heard, we had a breakthrough with the TBM at 63rd Street, and don't start it yet. I won't. And in addition to that, actually, we awarded another contract at 86th Street. This is the cavern contract. And in October, we're finishing the utility work above at 86th Street. So that actually is moving along rather well. We have a 2 minutes 2nd Avenue subway breakthrough. lot of dust, I can tell you that much. I can tell you that we all came out of there rather dusty. Not to speak about wet.
It was a major milestone.
Right. Hopefully, it was not a board. It was not a board event, right? A board event. It was an exciting event, I can tell you that much. Well, Asta was dressed in suits, I can assure you. I had a dark blue suit. It was not dark blue at the end. Okay. Anyway, so that was actually quite an event-filled summer for us. We had also to go through the hurricane, but we actually weathered that well. And that's about it.
Both tunnels are now connected to 63rd and Lex Station?
No, the western tunnel has about 300 linear feet because when we had the tunnel boring machine in there, we could not make the turn. It was too tight, so that is actually done shoot and blast.
I see.
This is the preferred method for 2nd Avenue's residents.
Are you removing or leaving the tunnel boring machine?
We are removing it within about 3 weeks. We expect to have it back at 92nd Street. We'll take about another 2 weeks to actually pull it up, and so within 5 weeks that will be gone. And it's going back to its owners, the Chavon, and this is, by the way, the same skeleton, not exactly the same machine, but it's the same machine, theoretically, that did the 63rd Street Tunnel in 78, 80. So hopefully we'll do another one.
You don't want to leave it around so that when you go south of 63rd Street, it's already there?
Well, we wish we could, but I don't think it's in the cards.
Chief Procurement Officer Steve Plachaki, can you go through them, please?
All the procurements are on Section 6 of the book, and since this is a hot committee, I'm sure you've memorized them all anyway, but Steve, what do we got?
The procurement package this month, which represents both New York City Transit and MTA procurements, includes 29 actions totaling $261.1 million in expenditures.
God bless. Any of the procurements? Chuck?
Surprise. I am concerned about some of these procurements. Let me illustrate my concern, just as I did at transit, in trains, in terms of the very first procurement, ACI. That's a modification, but the modification isn't something minor. It's taking a whole new contract and a whole new 5 years. It doesn't comply on its face with the provisions of either 1209 or 1265A of the State Public Authorities Law. And my concern is, if it does, if you've either done a posting or if you've complied with one of the exceptions and not sent it out for competitive bidding for an approved basis, you've got to state that in here. And I don't see it here. Because on its face, it clearly doesn't comply with the law. And the question is, have you invoked an exception, and if so, what is it? And all I'm asking you to do is, in the future, please say so.
Fine, we'll say it in the future. But we did conduct a survey, and we determined that it would be beneficial to continue to move forward in this particular fashion, and that's why we're bringing it to the board for approval as opposed to
forgive me, survey is not what the statute provides. The statute has specific language on what you have to do to comply with the public authorities law. And all I'm asking is, in the future, tell us how you complied. Or have counsel give you an opinion on it.
We will do that.
Thanks.
Any more questions on the procurements? Is there a motion to approve the procurements? All in favor? Any opposed? The procurements are approved.
I think MTACC has one action item.
Yes, Capital Construction has an action item. We're asking for ratification of an agreement with a private building owner in order to perform some design and revise some structural changes in order to facilitate the construction of an entrance to the 72nd Street subway station. This agreement was in the amount of $286,000.
Is there a motion to approve the action item? All in favor? Any opposed? Action item is carried.
Service
changes.
Moving on to Section 8 of the agenda, we are presenting a service change proposal to implement subway service reductions on 10 minor holidays. Minor holidays are something less than a major, like a presidential or national holiday, but they're days in which we actually see a reduction in the number of riders that we carry. Historically, over the years, we first instituted on the bus side service reductions, I believe, Peter, to provide service commensurate with that. And what we're proposing on the holidays noted is to implement a reduction in train service on all of our numbered lines, the IRT, during the AM and peak periods to reflect that horizontal, that historical reduction. We will maintain vigilance over watching to see what impact they have. They're well within the guidelines that we've set aside and have brought forward for board approval. And we expect to implement this same concept over time on the B division. These particular actions will save us about $200,000 annually. As we put them in the budget, that's how we can generate the savings.
Questions, anyone? Andrew?
When you say you see lighter riding on these days, are you referring to rush hour riding or throughout the course of the day?
Peter?
Hi. Generally these days they are at least 40% lower than a normal weekday, and those are the days like Columbus Day, and then you get to the day after Thanksgiving, it's about 60 to 70%. It's still a lot more than a Saturday, so that's why we can't run a Saturday schedule. Most of that reduction is in the rush hours, and our service changes that we're talking about here are only in the rush hours. That was one of the lessons we learned over the summer in terms of.
So this light riding schedule is rush hour only. The rest of the day is normal? Because from all indications, the day after Thanksgiving is the busiest shopping day of the year or some such thing like that?
I'm not an expert on shopping volumes, but yes, certainly that's what's reported in the press. We have the ridership in general, though, is that much lower, so there's capacity for additional shoppers, but we're not changing the midday service.
So this is like a 7 to 10 or in something in that,
right.
4 to 7?
Correct.
And you get the effectual reduction on the peak demand charge for electricity as well.
If all of this is true, why is the B division not getting the same treatment?
We're doing this in a rather conservative fashion, rolling it out. So we're in terms of writing schedules, but also going out and following up as each of these rolls in, because we just want to make sure they're working well before we institutionalize them.
We started with buses and made sure, under the heading of like put your proverbial toe in the water and see how it works, it worked. And then we rolled it out to the IRT or the A division, and then we're going to go to the B division.
And how will you be checking on volumes to make sure that this is all panning out the way you expected?
We'll have employees out on each of these days. Obviously, they all come around once a year, so it's going to be an intense effort each time to monitor them and see how it goes.
Okay, thank you.
Presentation.
Some of this,
the Metro card.
We normally just have that in the book if there's any questions. The same with the Section 9 of the 2 financial reports. I believe the only presentation that we're going to make is the elevator and escalator presentation. We made a conscious decision, even though the agenda is crowded this month, because we have a quarterly report on elevators and escalators, and one of the board members had a question. So, Tony, if you would quickly go through the presentation, and certainly we'll take any questions. It is a high priority for us, as you know.
Sure. So my purpose is to inform the committee members of the steps New York City Transit is taking to improve the performance of elevators and escalators. And if we go to the first slide, you can see that we're not in the place where we want to be. Performance on elevator availability declined in the second quarter. Since then, and I've included data through 21 of September for the third quarter, since then there's a small improvement in the availability of elevators. As for escalators, there is a trend of improving. Again, is small every quarter, but it is improving. We believe that the main reasons why we had such a drop in the second quarter, and it was noticeable in elevators, is a number of things. One of them, we had 22 elevator outages that were more than 7 days and accounted for 36% of the total downtime. We think that our effort to improve the performance of maintenance, the required inspections and maintenance, which also counts against our availability, and we reached 100% in the second quarter, and we are doing so again in the third quarter. That also has an impact on our availability figures. And this is both for elevators and escalators. So the steps that we're taking to improve our performance, you turn to the second page, we have established some principles of operations that fall into three categories that we believe we can improve in. And these three categories are effectiveness, communication, and performance management. These are things we're doing right now, by the way. These principles of operations have associated with them some pilot actions that we're taking. So, for example, we are organizing our resources to reduce the long outage duration events. And by that I mean there is planned work that if we do it in conjunction with a general order that closes the station, and we put people to work continuously on that job, we, I believe, make a significant improvement in the availability of the equipment. And if you could just kindly turn quickly to the third slide, the next page, you will see that at Grand Central we piloted an overhaul that would normally take us 45 days to complete at pay hours of 2,200 pay hours. And at Grand Central, we piloted this effort, and we were able to do it in 7 days for 1,900 hours of pay. So it's not only a bit cheaper, it's much, much faster. That's one example. We are also piloting electronically controlled monitoring systems so that we can predict better the wear and tear on our equipment and anticipate when we need to replace that component. We're also working diligently to fix entrapment relays to reduce or eliminate false indications. As you may know, we have a system that we're working on. That system right now would create false indications of entrapments, and we could not possibly have all the resources to tend to those. So we need to correct that, and we're piloting a fix at one of our elevators, and so far it looks very promising. Under communication, we intend to increase customer knowledge of outages before they encounter them in the system. To that end, we are working to create a subscriber system to activate text message alerts for customers who wish to be informed on when the equipment goes out of service. We are also working to improve our website interface as well as the accuracy and timeliness of the information that gets inputted there. And finally, on that category, we're working to improve in-station outage signage. And an example of that is on the last page of the presentation, and these are signs that we are now using We still have more to do, but these are signs that we're using right now. Moving on to performance management, we are doing a pilot at one of our facilities to provide feedback to our employees as to the status of our equipment so that they know when they arrive at the facility or when they are at the facility to leave, they know what the number of outages are, where the outages are. Visually, we will put a screen. This is to provide them feedback so we can get some buyback from them in that regard. We are also improving data entry procedures. We've established new procedures. We have trained everyone in the procedures. We want to make sure that we capture all the data that is necessary for us to do proper analysis going on. And we're also putting in some internal controls so that we audit the accuracy of the data that we collect. If we don't have accurate data, we can't really know what the problem is. So we are, as I say, auditing the accuracy of the data collected on the work that we perform and on the outages. As for the question that was raised about Pelham Bay Park, we have in the plan for 2013 to replace the 2 elevators at Pelham Bay Park.
That's not acceptable. Mr. Chairman, may I? It's not acceptable to say to the people who use that subway station and have it functioning with the elevators 1/3 of the time, to say, wait till 213, have a good walk in between. Doesn't work. It doesn't work at 181st Street in Manhattan, where you have 0 availability. It doesn't work at Delancey Street, where you have 0 availability. It doesn't work at 5th Avenue and 53rd, where you have 50% of the time. It doesn't work at Flushing Avenue, where you have 8.4% of the time available. That is unacceptable.
I'd like to. I'm not so sure Tony was completed talking, but I will tell you from my level as president and from Carmen Bianco's level, if we make a statement that we need to replace an escalator, we need to put it into or an elevator in a capital program, it does not mean that we abrogate or abandon our responsibilities in terms of maintenance. I think what we're saying in some of these cases, in some cases in prior administrations, I'm not going to get into details, people said they overhauled an escalator or an elevator and they actually overhauled only a part of it. And we've got escalators and elevators and motors in the system that are over 80 years old. It's arguable whether or not they're giving us the performance we need. So we will stand by a commitment to do whatever we can to get the availability up through maintenance actions. But I believe in some cases the longer-term solution is an out-of-phase replacement of that device. But that doesn't mean we would do one at the expense of the other.
Tom, forgive me for this. I have no question as to both the genuineness and your determination to accomplish it. But when you stand, as I do, at Pelham Bay Park, and you wind up trying to get up to the station, and you know you're going to have to schlep up those stairs because the escalator again isn't working, or when somebody calls you in the middle of the night and says, I'm delayed because the 63rd Street station escalators are just not working, we've got to pay attention to that. I know you will. My purpose here is to make sure, by a strident tone, if necessary, that attention remains focused on doing it. And I know you will do that. I just want to make sure everybody else understands that.
Point noted.
Well,
May I follow that question up with another question?
Ready?
Apart from the elevator replacement, is there a larger redo of that station in the offing for 2013 or sometime thereafter? Yeah, Pelham Bay Park.
Answer it verbally, don't you shake your head.
No, there's nothing planned in the current 12 to 14 capital program.
I mean, one of the things we'll come forward with at a later date. You've all heard the story about what we're trying to do, get the last 3 years of the current capital program funded. Is we're going to have some very difficult decisions to make with respect to what, pardon the expression, mouths get fed and what don't get fed. And we've got some rather acute needs across all the infrastructure, track, power signals, communication, line equipment, emergency fans, pumps, things of that nature. and generally outside of a safety defect, I think we call it Category 4 defects or Category 5, Fred, on the safety side. Those issues, we will sort, but we've got some extremely difficult decisions to make that in sometime in the next 2 or 3 months, maybe a little bit longer, we will bring forward to the board because they're very difficult decisions.
Well, then it's appropriate, I think, to get back to and drill a little deeper into Mr. Merdler's question.
Absolutely.
That there is a wait until at least 2013. Who knows what will occur as that date approaches. What's going to be done in the short term to bring that availability up? Is there an answer now, or will there be an answer in the coming days?
The answer you've seen from a programmatic level, the specific answer at Pelham Bay Parkway we need to get back to you on, but the approach, some of the things that are obvious, and maybe we should state them, or they're not that obvious, but when you run a 24-hour system, 24 hours, 7 days a week, any outage counts against you. Most systems do not do that, so they do most of their inspection and maintenance in the hours that are down.
Talking about elevators and escalators.
Yeah, but we operate 24 hours, 7 days a week, whereas there are some systems that shut down and the stations are totally closed. They do the inspections and maintenance on those times. Doesn't count against their availability. But we will look at things like piggybacking on geos. And one of the examples we didn't make explicit here, is there was a philosophy within the department that if you put a crew working on an escalator and you're going to rebuild it, keep the same crew on it. So they'd work a tour a day, then it would lay dormant for 2 tours, then come back the next day, work another tour. And Tony's changing some of those philosophies. The idea is to try to get the elevators and escalators up and running as fast as possible. There's one thing we didn't state here, but we've all agreed, is irrespective of what the numbers say, the public perceptions are in a totally different place.
Well, zero's still zero.
Understand that. We will come back to you with a plan for Pelham Bay Parkway.
Thanks.
Pelham Bay Parkway. We focus on them system-wide. And part of it's driven by volume, but also part of it's driven by the need that some people have to be able to avail themselves of the system. They have to have that device available for them.
It looks like there's a lot of work scheduled on the Pelham line from Bury south to Whitlock, so maybe on one of those GOs, this could be hey.
We certainly look at that, and we will come back to you with a specific plan for that.
Tom, can I
go ahead?
Can I say something? I think we are in the same place. We're not happy with the performance that we're seeing across elevators and escalators. One of the reasons Tony's in his position is he's new to the job. We're bringing in new leadership to take a fresh look at it. We've done an awful lot in the last couple of months to begin to uncover what some of our problems are, to begin to communicate better around what our problems are, to look at the way we're producing our work and does it make sense. And as you see, there's a few examples up there where we have had some success. Now, that's not to say that we don't have a long way to go. The escalator at Pelham Bay Park requires it's going to require a major amount of work to get it functioning. I believe it's a chain. Am I right, Joe? A chain and steps. And as soon as we get those, we will put that in, and hopefully that's going to maintain that until we're able to replace it in 2013. But I just want to try to reassure you that we are not just sitting back and doing nothing with this. This is, we're trying to do our best to. These are very difficult systems, machines to keep up and running.
Both you and Tony, you and Tom and your colleagues are doing those things you can within budgetary constraints. My function, as I see it, is to make sure that the riding public knows that that is being done, that the questions are being asked, that the follow-up is assured, and that to the best extent possible, we discharge our fiduciary obligations of keeping
we forgive you for that, Chuck. It's okay. Jeff?
I don't want to belabor the issue. One is I wanted to point out what Carmen mentioned, which is I know that Tony's new to the role, and that was an important part of this overhaul. Second, I think historically we had some issues. I think it was with the escalators and making sure the newer escalators to make sure that there was the warranty on it. That was not mentioned in here. And two, the LiftNet system and the actual computer system that monitors all this, I think, was written exclusively in the IG report recently, and I didn't see. I think.
Well, one of the references down here in terms of performance management is soft on it. There's a tie to that.
Because
we have a system in place that was not being used by management. And I have to elaborate something. While Tony is new to the job, he's not new to the Transit Authority. He has had numerous jobs and challenges throughout his career, and he's ably demonstrated his ability to deal with it. TVMs, the likes, and things like that where you need an immediate response. So he will deal with that. The people we had working prior, not to cast aspersions or blame them, they were so close to the forest couldn't see the trees. The IG report was an eye-opener in the sense that we had the system that wasn't being utilized. And so one of the things we're trying to do is make sure that we take advantage of that information so that you can make informed decisions and deploy resources accordingly to get the downtime down to an acceptable level by all.
And the warranties, and I think it was escalators, I can't remember.
Well, there's a piece silent here. There's a certain percentage of our elevators and escalators that are the responsibility of third parties as part of agreements we have with developers. And we're very aggressively managing that along hard contract lines. If we say in a particular contract there's a performance requirement that's to be met, we're going to hold that developer to that performance requirement.
I wasn't referring to those third-party ones, but I think we had purchased, the MTA had purchased new escalators from a manufacturer that I think turned out to not be as well received or operated as efficiently, I think.
You may be referring to Fujitec escalators at 34th Street, Herald Square.
You actually have elevators and escalators both at Pelham Bay Park. They're not both simultaneously out of service, are they?
No, not necessarily. I can say that they can't be out of service at one given point, but they're not. I just checked my numbers. Just for a point of reference, and I know this is in the past, but in the year 2010, the elevators at Pelham Bay Park, one of them had a 97% availability. The other one had a 95% availability, and the escalators, one had a 92%, and then another one had a 96%. That's in 2010. I don't mean to imply that we'd be satisfied with 92% availability, and I didn't mean to imply that if it's going to have a replacement through the capital program in 2013, that we're not going to do our utmost to address when they're down and put them back into service. One of the things that I tried to say is that if we think that an escalator, for example, will benefit from a replacement of the steps and the chain, we're going to plan that and work on that continuously, which is something that we did not used to do in the past. So that's what I meant to say when I talked about replacement.
Tony, I know that you are relatively new to this, but how many elevators and how many escalators and how many movable platforms or whatever you call that thing in Brooklyn do we have in the system?
We have 178 escalators, 194 revenue elevators. We have 2 platforms that are the moving platforms at the City Core building, and then we have 39 elevators that are not revenue elevators. These are elevators that are in our buildings and yards and shops.
And how many people work in your E&E division?
We have 250 maintainers to do this work.
That, I hope, is at least some either reassurance or an alarming statistic, whichever way you want to look at it.
No, we do not. Only for replacement of it.
Yes. Is there a standard that we're trying to keep ourselves to as far as availability? Is there a number? Is 99%? Is it 95%? I'm just...
No. Well,
no?
we have a goal.
What's our goal?
And our goal is 96.5 for elevators and 95.2% availability for escalators.
For each escalator, not overall?
No, for overall.
Oh, for overall. So an escalator could be... Well, then we're meeting that, aren't we?
No, we're not meeting that.
Where are we not?
No, we're not meeting that.
Some boroughs are meeting it. We're not? Okay, that's an overall, but for a particular... an escalator could be out half the year, and... but that's something you'd want to address, I assume.
Yes,
Yeah,
and absolutely. I mean, of course, it would be best if we had every escalator available 92.5 or 95.2, but that's not how we measure that. It's the overall average availability of the system.
It's the trouble with averages.
Yeah, well, yeah, if you happen to be the one, everyone will be fine. You could be the one that's out. But if you're addressing a particular problem, I mean, this. Let me just one last comment because we're running late. But
I thought I had lost my mind when I was at 3rd Avenue on the 7 line coming down these escalators, because I noticed that they had been rehabilitated, and I was there a week before, 2 weeks before, whatever it was, and I was shocked to see this. So if this is what you plan in the future, I think it's a great way to go, because often one of the biggest problems I know we face as passengers is you come across one of these escalator repairs, the thing's out for months, and then months again after that. It's never done on time. So
do we need to deal with?
That's exactly what I. Yeah.
There's a two-prong approach to this. One is the actual numbers we have to measure to, but also the perceptual, because you may hit the actual numbers and still not satisfy the perception.
Tony, what is left before we join up with a very rare dual meeting with the bus committee?
There's some standard follow-up reports that are in the book, have to do with elevator and escalator performance. We've entertained some of those questions right now, and also the passenger environment survey. But also, if you have any questions after the meeting, by all means, contact me or Carmen. We'll be glad to respond. We have a need to have a presentation on a matter of interest that pertains to both the New York City Transit Committee as well as the Bus Committee, and it has to do with a request some board members made about an analysis of the effects of the 2010 bus service reductions and subway reductions before we go on with the normal business of doing service changes both within guidelines and outside of guidelines, or anything that requires board approval. We have been bringing forward to the board. In the recent past, about 3 or 4 months ago, a number of board members asked also, prior to going forward with those that are within the confines of the guidelines, we bring them forward to the board for information before implementing them. But the purpose of today's presentation is to give you a summary of what that analysis has revealed and what we found, and have a discussion on that. So I'd ask all the people that are, with the exception of Carmen and Bob, can leave, and Peter Cafiero needs to. You can go. You can go. Yes.
Do we stay here?
Yes. Yes, but we're going to do this presentation jointly, so they don't have to do it again.
Do you want us to move?
No, I think they can sit right there.
The idea would be to continue the bus committee while this is still in session, and
then we can leave.
This committee can then adjourn.
Can I sit as close to Nancy as possible?
Nancy can sit right here. Mark, this is
oh, good.
Here. Yeah.
It doesn't work or something.
Julia, you should sit right there. Right there, Julia. Right there.
That's right. We expect everything to work all the time.
Yes, Nancy.
Why are you putting me in the middle?
It's your committee.
Oh, it's
I'll sit right here. I'm going to sit right here.
Okay, so how long?
I'm not going to move an inch.
Mark, how long is this going to take you?
How long is this going to take, Tom?
We have to get it done in 15 minutes, no more than 10, 15 minutes. We'll move as fast as possible.
Are we
get
ready?
constrained at the front end with the commuter rail committee running a half hour over every month. So we have to address the schedule because there's so much stuff.
It's because certain people should ask questions, not always in front of the committee. You don't have to ask every question in front of everybody.
Okay. As I said in the preamble, we need to bring the committee. You need to convene your committee, and then we'll stop out. And then when this presentation is over, we'll adjourn.
Go ahead, Tom. The floor is Nancy and I give you.
No, you have to adjourn your committee.
No. He'll adjourn later. You open up your committee meeting.
Hello, we're open.
Okay. Okay, just to make sure that it's clear, we're having a joint session between the Bus Committee and the New York City Transit Committee to talk about service reductions that affect both bus and subway service, and then the New York City Transit Committee will, the M34 SBS. As you know, in 2010, the board approved a number of service reductions that were very painful. We went through a very long public hearing process. And in my 35, 40 years, it was by far some of the most painful service reductions that we had to sustain. What the board had asked a few months back was to do an analysis of those service reductions so that we could make informed decisions as to whether or not going forward, as we were both implementing service changes within the guidelines, that did not require board approval would just bring forward to the board for information, as well as ones that came forward to the board for their approval, that they would have a framework with respect to be able to evaluate that information. So what operations planning did, both with the New York City Transit as well as MTA Bus, is look at those service reductions, and we have a short presentation that we'd like to go through and then entertain any questions you may have. Peter Capiero from Operations Planning, Norm Silverman, Operations Planning, New York City Transit, Norm Silverman from MTA Bus, and Judy McLean Judy's actually going to give the presentation. So, Judy?
Good afternoon. Just to kind of start with the background of where we were in 2010, MTA was looking at a $900 million budget gap. And in response to that, New York City Transit implemented service reductions in June 2010 that saved approximately $70 million annually. This helped stabilize MTA's finances and help preserve appropriate levels of service on the subways and the buses. We focused on reducing services on our least utilized routes and route spans, and also route segments. In terms of the number of trips or how many trips were affected, basically 85% of New York City Transit subway and bus trips were unaffected by the service reductions. An additional 10% of subway trips were affected in a very minor way, basically minor service reductions. Folks had to wait a minute or two longer for their subway train. In terms of this follow-up evaluation, we look comprehensively at the ridership changes and the cost effectiveness of the remaining routes in the corridors after the implementation of the service changes. The evaluation presents actions that we've taken since the implementation of the changes to correct some shortcomings in the original plan and to maintain our loading and service guidelines. We also provide a framework for moving forward, as Tom mentioned. We also provide some context to view the ridership changes that are associated with the service reductions. In terms of our system-wide ridership, subway ridership over the past decade has basically been increasing, except for a recession-related drop in 2009. Subway ridership continued to increase even after the service reductions after 2010. On the bus side, things were a little bit different. Basically, over the past decade, ridership has generally been flat. However, in Manhattan and in Brooklyn, ridership has been declining. It was declining before the service reductions and has continued to decline after the service reductions. Primarily, these reductions are because people are shifting from the buses to the subways, and traffic congestion has been driving some people away from the buses. In trying to determine what's been happening with ridership, it's difficult. Actual ridership losses due to the bus service reductions are hard to predict given the variability of ridership effects of various factors, such as the economy, fare increases, and demographic changes, as well as other unknown factors. On the subway side, as I mentioned, ridership does not appear to have been adversely affected by the subway service reductions, and has actually increased in part because some of the bus riders have shifted to the subway system, which is a more efficient mode of transportation. On the bus side, ridership is estimated to have declined approximately 1.7%, which is approximately what we had projected, with a portion of those lost bus riders, 0.6%, diverted to the subway, resulting in a net loss of bus ridership of approximately 1%. On the subway side, we analyzed ridership travel pattern changes and the shifts to other lines. We determined if those shifts created subway loads that still complied with our MTA guidelines, and we addressed some operational and scheduling issues. Our subway findings were that subway riders continued to ride the subway despite minor reductions in service frequencies and increases on some train loads. However, despite the increase in these train loads, we still remain within MTA loading guidelines, although we did have to make a minor service adjustment on the J train in the AM shoulder periods. We also found in our analysis that some riders actually benefited from new direct subway access. North Brooklyn riders now have a direct weekday service to Midtown via the rerouted M line, and we found that ridership significantly increased at 6th Avenue stations. Brooklyn N riders also now have direct access via the Manhattan Bridge to local Manhattan stations between Canal Street and 34th Street on weekdays, and ridership at those local stations also increased significantly. In terms of follow-up actions, I mentioned we had to increase some service on the J train, and we also readjusted some schedules on the M train to reduce some service gaps northbound between the 6th Avenue line and the 53rd Street line during the AM rush hour. In terms of our bus evaluation, we also looked at ridership changes in affected corridors and tried to determine where people were shifting to other services, bus and subway services, and determine whether they were still riding our transit services at all. We looked at the remaining bus routes and tried to determine if loads were within our guidelines. And we also analyzed the cost per rider on the remaining bus routes in the affected corridors to determine the effect on cost effectiveness. Our findings kind of broke out into, our findings for both local bus and express buses were generally fell into three different types. Our most desired outcome was that all or most ridership shifted to other bus or subway routes. So overall, ridership increased or stayed about the same, and cost efficiency improved. Our most common outcome was that some riders shifted to other bus and subway routes, but overall, ridership decreased while cost efficiency improved. And our least desired outcome, although it was not unanticipated, was that most riders no longer took transit. In this case, ridership decreased and cost efficiency also decreased or was unchanged. A couple of examples of when this happened. To maintain geographic coverage, where we discontinued a route, we sometimes rerouted another bus route, and as a result of that reroute, it became less efficient, but at the same time we did provide that geographic coverage. Another example is where we had a very, very low performing route. Some of the routes where we had the absolute lowest level of ridership, and in some cases we had to discontinue that route and the ridership was lost. In terms of follow-up actions on the bus side that we've already taken, we've already begun to we've had to adjust service in a few places to meet our loading guidelines. We've adjusted service on express bus routes where travel times were longer than anticipated due to traffic. We've rescheduled rush hour buses to correct some bus bunching problems. And we've made some cost-neutral adjustments in conjunction with community input. And we've also had to made some minor adjustments to route spans. So overall, in conclusion, our evaluation showed that 90% of all subway and bus riders were unaffected or minimally affected by the service reductions. Virtually all subway riders continue to use the subway, and about 99% of bus riders continue to make their trips using buses or subways. The service reductions did result in some customers losing access to transit service or experiencing a degradation in their service. However, our need to reduce costs made such impacts unavoidable. Bus ridership losses were greatest in Manhattan and in Brooklyn, where ridership was already declining, and as I said, in part this is due to riders shifting to the subway or traffic problems. While more subway riders were affected than bus riders, most of those were minimally impacted by small service frequency changes. As a result of the service reduction, cost efficiency of the remaining services improved in most cases, with only a 0.3% drop in bus and subway ridership combined. MTA Bus Company's evaluation of its service reductions mirrored New York City Transit's findings. So, in moving forward, we will continue to use our established service change process. That process involves considering 5 factors: our loading guidelines, transit dependency, the availability of alternative service, economic performance, and population density. We will also continue to work with communities and analyze ridership patterns and operational issues to develop some cost-neutral improvements. As we move forward, we will compare new service investments with the restoration of service cuts that resulted in significant ridership losses. For example, a discontinued route where most riders shifted to non-transit modes.
That's the end of the presentation, but I want to make sure that you understand that summary presentation was only developed after a route-by-route analysis was done, and that's the copy which you have in front of you. So if you want to read the analysis of any one particular route and its impacts, that would be this. I think we want to make sure that we will keep the board informed as to what's going on. I think the 3 outcomes speak for themselves in terms of, the least desired one, whereas we lost riders. That's when we have to continually reach back and take a look to see what we need to do to possibly reinstitute those services. If the need for transit dependency is high and there's no other forms, some cases we may not do that. But where we were able to shift riders to either a more efficient mode of service, such as subways, or a more efficient bus route, that's, even as bad as the issue was, those are good outcomes in terms of being able to have more money to deliver service to other folks.
Forgive me for being quick. I need to run. But having been someone that pushed hard to make sure that we had a comprehensive look at these cuts after seeing a couple line-by-line changes, I just want to thank everyone for their really hard work. Peter, I know, and others in the bus company and the transit authority worked really hard. It is extremely comprehensive document. In fact, having seen pieces of this before, has a lot of really, really good information and was very thorough, and in fact, in some cases, were more thorough than the information we were provided in making these cuts. So I appreciate that. On the information, the conclusions, as the rest of everyone on the board gets a chance to look at this thing, I hope we learn from it. But I do want to thank you for this really comprehensive look. I'm glad that we can look at it overall instead of line by line, because if you look at it line by line, you get pressured by a lot of community concerns, because communities may look at this and may not see the same information that's being provided in here. So I just wanted to overall thank you for that. I think this is helpful. And give us
I will agree. One of the things that we did learn when we showed this to elected officials and other concerned peoples and riders, they realized the seriousness of the situation in terms of the finances and the ability for us to go to a different place, which is cost-neutral improvements, where they sat down and said, well, we may not want that service, but we want something else, but we'll do it within the confines of a cost-neutral improvement. It's new ground for us. I mean, the M50 was an example of that. We've had other discussions in other parts of the city, and people buy onto the concept.
Jeff, at the last meeting you asked, did we evaluate the service reductions? Look what you got. Well, one question.
The man is so powerful, it's amazing. What do you have? The third paragraph there is obviously the most important, or the hardest aspect of this is to see where people no longer take mass transit at all. Do we have any idea, and I apologize, this is the first time I've seen the report, obviously, to determine what percentage that is of the people who were affected by any of the changes?
We found that we lost about 1% of our bus ridership.
Which is how many?
That's about 22,000 riders on an average weekday.
So the assumption being that those 22,000 people, trips, not people, trips, as I've learned, left the bus system and did not go to either another bus route or to the subway itself. They've left the system completely?
If I could add on that, that's a conservative worst-case number. There's a number of situations where it was very hard to track everybody.
Right.
And so it's possible that some of that 22,000, that 1%, are still in the system, but it's just dispersed with everything else going on.
Or they're not traveling. I mean, some of these are a result of demographic or job, economy changes. But you're right. There are 22,000 less customers that we can find on our system. Yeah.
Than there were before we did this.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. As one of the people with Jeff who asked for this, I also thank you for the analysis. I think the analysis is really good. I think we shouldn't gloss over the fact that we are losing some riders because of these service cuts. The system no longer works for everybody if you're one of the folks. And I thought we were told that at maximum you'd only have a 10-minute walk to the next nearest bus. Obviously, those riders from the Q79 know that that is not the case. People going to those nursing homes we heard at the public hearings on Staten Island on weekends are no longer able to get to their jobs. So if you're one of those folks impacted, this analysis just doesn't work for you. I really feel that the MTA has the franchise to serve the entire city, not just the profitable parts of the city. I think that's something that's very important. That's why you get all the tax dollars and all of that. And I know we had to make cuts because of, cuts from Albany and all of that. But there's cuts that were made last June 27th that make the existing system less usable for folks. And I'm wondering if there's any analysis of those and why you're going to continue to lose riders, hypothetically on the M10, on the M104, which were short-turned and become much less useful to their users. Several routes in Brooklyn have been short-turned. So, I'm thankful for the analysis. I'm glad that we have a line-by-line analysis of this. You can't obviously continue to keep cutting and expect to keep everything but 1% of your ridership. And, if the city is going to prosper, we really need to expand the system, not continually shrink it. So, again, thanks for the hard work, but I don't think the work is over by any stretch.
Good morning. Mark?
I think that the idea that we should be providing transit in places where it's not profitable, where it's not profitable anywhere as a practical matter in terms of the way that we run mass transit. And yes, we do get tax revenue, but the thing that we're up against is the limits on the sort of willingness of the political process to provide, and the taxpayers, to provide money for this public service. And I think that, on the one hand, yes, it would be nice. The existing system doesn't provide perfect mass transit for everyone, didn't before we started cutting services. Unfortunately, we're faced with the responsibility to balance the resources we have with the best service we are able to provide within that box. And I don't think that comparing this to some kind of ideal of universal service is unfortunately in the world that we're living in.
Spoken like a true budget director.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
With respect, I dissent from the distinguished budget director's comments. It seems to me that there are areas outside of the fare box and tax revenue where both the City of New York and the MTA can optimize revenues, whether it be monetizing development rights or other vehicles. We ought to explore those because they could provide hundreds of millions of dollars, and I'm not exaggerating in that estimate, that could fill the void. I am concerned, and let me tell you what my concern is. I serve on the community board as the chair. Transit once did as well. And we get these gripes on a regular basis. I can't move out of my house.
Is that a conflict of interest for your being on this board?
If so, I'll resign from one or another, but I don't believe so. Indeed, it gives the community an opportunity to be heard at this level. The point is, when I have those concerns, I communicate them to Tom. He is invariably on the mark. But you have an issue here. There are people who are not getting any service at all. Look at page B9. B9, they just left the system. They're getting no service at all. The people, if they're elderly, are going to get really in trouble. The chairman of the City Council Transportation Committee, Councilman Baca, has made this point over and over again. We have a public responsibility. If, as Mark accurately states it, there is no appetite on the part of the riding public, and there is no means by which we can go outside of the envelope and generate new money, then the public has to know we failed, because it is a failure. We're at a time where we increase fares, we increase tolls, we increase everything, and the concomitant result is we decrease service. That, to my mind, is unacceptable, and to my mind, we have to do something about it. You're trying here. This is an excellent piece of work, and I obviously haven't read it at this point. But the point is that we've got to do something about this. Not to just say, well, we don't have the money, let's forget about it.
The last item we want to cover after this is we want to make sure that... I'm sorry.
Yeah, if I just might have my 1 minute. I have to agree with colleague Albert in terms of this, and this is a great piece of work, and I understand the constraints for which you've operated and how you have gone route by route and tried to deal with it. And I have no issue at all with transit or your operations people and what they've done in the analysis and what it shows. I do however, have a philosophical problem about where we went down on this. I understand the financial realities that we had to make, and it was a Hobson's choice. However, that choice hopefully will not last forever, and that these issues, in many instances, need to be readdressed. We have a responsibility to provide public transit to all parts of this system, not just those places that have subway systems. Okay, and not that the subway systems are being funded adequately. People are very dependent upon public transit. Pushing people into their cars should not be something that we're happy about. To me, there's a kind of an irony in that we push people into cars and then we bang them over the head with increased tolls. Why don't we stop doing any public transit and just collect tolls? Then we could be very profitable. And when I look, I get even more aggravated when I look at how we're now about to go down the road funding the capital plan for the future. We're taking operating money that could be used for providing services to people when the state of New York, the city of New York, and the federal government should be putting capital money in, and we should be expanding the system, not decreasing it. And I understand we can only deal with the dollars that we've got, but we shouldn't pretend that this is a happy choice that we're making.
Well, you can't say we're not passionate about public transportation, folks. What's left, Tom?
Just sure the board knows that in concert with our initiative to expand select bus service in the city, we're going to institute the select bus service along with the city on 34th Street. We've already got the X12 in the Bronx and the M15 in Manhattan, and the next one is the SBS M34, I believe. And if there's any questions, and we'll...
I just have a request, because on the end signage, and you really need bigger signs on the machines to say, please hold on to your receipt, you may be asked to produce it. I think the Eagle team will have a lot less to do if they will only have the proper signage and instruct people, please hold on to your receipt, you might be asked to show it.
On the BX12 and the M15, yes, and we report on that in the committee, but we can share that with you. Go ahead, Joe.
There's been about an 18% improvement in ridership and about an 18% decrease in running time. So the numbers have been encouraging.
This finishes the business of the New York City Transit Committee. Is there a motion to adjourn our part?
Motion.
All in favor? Thank you. We are adjourned, and we will effortlessly and seamlessly go into the rest of the bus committee report. You're on, Nancy.
Okay.